Let us set the scene. It is 1925, the Soviet Union. A time when romance usually meant sharing a potato and hoping the secret police didn't kick your door down. Meet Maria Oktyabrskia. She is a 20-year-old woman who meets a dashing, ridiculously handsome Soviet army cadet named Ilya. They fall in love, they get married, and they set out to build a perfect communist life together in the city of Kiev. Maria is not just a wife, she is the ultimate overachieving military spouse. She absolutely loves her husband, and she treats being an army wife like it is a competitive sport. She joins the Military Wives Council. She trains to become a combat nurse. She learns how to shoot weapons. She proudly tells everyone she meets, marry a serviceman, and you serve in the army. She is basically the 1930s Soviet equivalent of a soccer mum. But instead of bringing orange slices to practice, she brings a deep appreciation for state-sponsored militarism. For 14 years, they are the golden couple of the Red Army. Life is great. Then, 1939 happens. World War II breaks out, and by 1941, Adolf Hitler decides to launch Operation Barbarossa, tearing through the Soviet border. Ilya, now an officer, is immediately sent to the brutal front lines. Maria, like millions of others, is evacuated to the freezing, desolate wasteland of Tomsk in Siberia. For 2 entire years, Maria sits in Siberia. She waits for a letter. She waits for a telegram. She waits for a carrier pigeon. Anything. But nothing comes. Just the deafening silence of the Siberian winter. Finally, in 1943, a letter arrives. But it is not from Ilya. It is from the government. The letter coldly informs her that Ilya was killed in action back in 1941, defending Kiev. She had been waiting for a ghost for 2 whole years. The hope she had desperately clung to, the life they had built, it was all obliterated. Now, when a normal person receives news like this, they sink into a deep, paralyzing depression. They cry. They mourn. Maria bypassed the 5 stages of grief and went straight to stage 6, absolute, unadulterated, scorched earth rage. The Germans had taken everything from her home, her life, her beloved Ilya, and Maria decided, with a terrifying calmness, that the entire German military was going to pay the tab. But how does a grieving widow exact revenge on the most formidable military machine on earth? Simple. Aggressive retail therapy. Maria goes to her house and sells everything. Every dress, every piece of furniture, every heirloom. She works grueling odd jobs. She embarks on a fanatical fundraising campaign. She manages to scrape together 50,000 rubles. That is a massive fortune. And she takes this giant bag of cash, donates it to the Red Army, and places an order. For a T-34 medium tank, yes, a 26-ton armored death machine, because nothing cures a broken heart quite like high-explosive artillery. But she doesn't just buy it. She writes a direct letter to the State Defense Committee, a letter addressed to Joseph Stalin himself. The letter basically says, here is the money for a tank. I am naming it the Fighting Girlfriend. And oh, by the way, I am going to be the one driving it. You would think the Soviet High Command would say, ma'am, please seek therapy, but this is 1943 Soviet Union. They look at this raging widow with a bag of cash and say, you know what? This is fantastic PR. Stalin personally approves it. Maria is enrolled in a brutal 5-month tank driving program. While most tank crews get a few weeks of rush training, Maria gets the premium package. Upon graduation, she is assigned as the driver and mechanic of a pristine T-34 with the words Fighting Girlfriend painted boldly on the turret. Her new crew is absolutely horrified. They think this is a sick joke. They are elite soldiers assigned to a tank driven by a 38-year-old grieving widow. They expect her to panic at the first sound of gunfire. They expect to die. They were so wrong. On October 21st, 1943, near Smolensk, Fighting Girlfriend enters its first battle. Maria does not hold back. She skillfully pilots 26 tons of Soviet steel directly into the teeth of the German defenses. She crushes machine gun nests. She obliterates artillery positions. She drives like a woman who has literally nothing left to lose. Suddenly, a German anti-tank shell slams into them. The blast disables the left tread. The tank is stranded in the middle of a chaotic battlefield. The standard protocol here is to stay inside the armor, fire back, and pray for a tow truck. Not Maria. Disregarding direct orders, she pops the hatch, jumps out into a literal storm of Nazi gunfire, and starts fixing the tracks herself. It is the ultimate Karen asking to speak to the manager energy, but the manager is the Wehrmacht. She fixes the tread, hops back in, and drives away, completely saving her crew. From that day on, her crew worships her. She is promoted to sergeant. She does this again in November. Night battle, heavy artillery, tracks blown off. Maria jumps out into the dark, under heavy fire, fixes the tread, and gets back to killing. She is an unstoppable force of mechanical vengeance. But karma, or just the law of averages, eventually catches up. January 1944, the village of Krinky, another massive assault. The fighting girlfriend is tearing through the front lines when, boom, a third artillery shell knocks out the treads. As usual, Maria sighs, grabs her tools, and leaps out into the absolute hellfire. She works frantically. She actually manages to fix the issue, but this time, her luck runs dry. Just as she turns to climb back into her beloved tank, a massive explosion erupts right next to her. A piece of shrapnel strikes her squarely in the head. She is knocked unconscious, bleeding out in the snow. Her terrified crew drags her back inside and retreats. Maria Oktyabrskaya remained in a coma for 2 long months. She never woke up. She finally passed away from her injuries, joining her husband. Her personal tour of apocalyptic vengeance had lasted exactly 1 year. She was posthumously awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the land, a terrifying testament to the fact that you should never, ever stand between a woman and her husband. Let us pivot from a story of righteous vengeance to a story of pure, unfiltered psychosis. We are going back to the 1600s, the golden age of piracy. Before Disney made pirates look like quirky drunks with eyeliner, pirates were essentially floating serial killers. And the undisputed king of these psychopaths was a man named Francois Lolonais. Born as Jean-David Nau in 1630 in France, his early life was a masterclass in misery. His family was dirt poor, so poor, in fact, that as soon as he could walk and carry heavy things, they sold him into indentured servitude. He was shipped across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, where he spent his youth doing back-breaking labor on a tropical plantation under the blistering sun. He was beaten, starved, and treated worse than the livestock. By 1650, he finally finishes his servitude. He is a free man, a deeply traumatized, incredibly angry free man. He wanders the islands until he ends up in Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti. Here, he stumbles upon a group of men called the Buccaneers. Originally, these guys were just weirdos living in the woods, hunting wild pigs and smoking the meat on wooden racks called bucans. Hence the name Buccaneers. They were basically hardcore barbecue enthusiasts. But the Spanish Empire, who controlled the area, hated these squatters. The Spanish started taxing them, hunting them, and making their lives miserable. So the barbecue enthusiasts realized something important. Why hunt heavily armed wild pigs in a mosquito-infested jungle when you can just hunt heavily armed Spanish galleons full of gold? The Buccaneers transitioned from smoking meat to smoking Spanish sailors. Jean-David Nau joins this gang. They give him a cool nickname, Francois Lolonais, the French guy from Les Sables d'Olonne. For the first time in his miserable existence, Francois feels a sense of belonging. He has a family. He has a purpose. He is actually happy. Naturally, the universe decides to immediately ruin this. 2 years into his new career, Francois and his pirate buddies are shipwrecked on the Yucatan Peninsula. They are stranded. As they walk towards a nearby town for supplies, they are ambushed by a massive patrol of Spanish soldiers. It is not a battle. It is a slaughter. The Spanish troops massacre the Buccaneers without mercy. Francois realizes he is about to die. So he does the only logical thing. He grabs the freshly mutilated bodies of his best friends, smears their warm blood all over his face and clothes, and dives under a pile of their corpses playing dead. He lies there for hours, breathing in the smell of death, listening to the Spanish soldiers laugh and joke as they stab the bodies to make sure everyone is dead. When the Spanish finally leave, Francois crawls out from under the rotting meat of his only friends. He stands up, covered in gore, and looks at the mangled remains of the only people who ever treated him with kindness. And in that very moment, something inside Francois' brain just audibly snaps. The world had shown him nothing but cruelty. So he decided he was going to become the cruelty. He manages to steal a tiny rowboat, recruits some escaped slaves, and rows all the way back to Tortuga, the pirate haven. He gets a new ship. He recruits a new crew of absolute degenerates, but Francois is no longer interested in just stealing gold. No, he wants to inflict pain. He begins targeting Spanish settlements, not just ships. His brutality becomes legendary. This catches the attention of the Spanish governor of Cuba. The governor is annoyed. He sends a massive warship packed with 90 elite soldiers to Tortuga with one order: bring me the head of Francois Lolone. This expedition ends in an absolutely humiliating disaster. Francois outsmarts them, ambushes the warship, and captures the entire crew. All 90 men. The Spanish soldiers are bound and lined up on the deck. Francois walks up to them. He doesn't say a word. He just stares at them with dead, empty eyes and slowly begins sharpening his sword. Then, one by one, he personally beheads them. He hacks through the necks of 89 terrified men. The deck is literally ankle deep in blood. He leaves exactly one guy alive. He hands this traumatized survivor a letter and says, "Take this to the governor of Cuba. Tell him I will never give quarter to any Spaniard again, and tell him I hope to do this exact same thing to his neck." It was essentially a 1-star Yelp review, but delivered via mass decapitation. From here, Francois just goes completely off the rails. He becomes a living nightmare. When he captures people, he doesn't just hold them for ransom. He tortures them for fun. He would cut pieces of flesh off his victims and watch them bleed. He would burn people alive. And his absolute favorite party trick, his signature move, was called the knot. He would tie a thick, wet rope around a prisoner's head, put a stick in it, and twist it tighter and tighter until the pressure literally forced the victim's eyeballs to pop out of their skull. In 1666, he raids the city of Maracaibo. The citizens had already fled and hidden their gold. Francois tracks them down in the jungle. He tortures them until they reveal the locations of their life savings. He moves to Gibraltar, slaughters the garrison, and demands a ransom. The city pays the ransom. Francois takes the money, and then completely ransacks the city anyway. Because he is petty like that, on his way home, he burns down a random Native American fishing village. They weren't even Spanish, they just happened to be there. But karma is a patient hunter, and Francois' bill was about to come due. In 1667, he launches an expedition to Honduras. It is a total disaster. His ship runs aground. His crew is ambushed. He barely escapes. He makes his way to Panama, desperate, hungry, and losing his mind. And that is when he runs into the Kuna people, an indigenous tribe who really did not like heavily armed European psychopaths trespassing on their land. The Kuna warriors capture Francois, but they don't take him to a jail. They don't ask for a ransom. Instead, they drag the most feared pirate in the Caribbean into their village. While he is still completely alive and screaming, they slowly cut him into tiny, bite-sized pieces. They throw those pieces onto a fire and they roast him. They literally turn the terror of the Spanish Main into a beachside barbecue. They roast him until there is nothing left but ash. History's most terrifying pirate, the man who beheaded armies and burned cities, ending his career as a human shish kebab. A tragic loss for the pirate community, but a massive win for the culinary arts. Ceased la vie. For our final act, we travel to the swamps of North Carolina. It is April 1861. The American Civil War has just kicked off. The nation is tearing itself apart. But in Robeson County, a 16-year-old kid named Henry Berry, Lowry, is just trying to live a normal life. Henry belongs to the Lumbee tribe. They are an indigenous people who have lived in these swamps for generations. They are poor, they mind their own business, and they just want to be left alone. But the Confederate Army has other plans. The Confederacy needs forts built, and they don't want to pay for labor. So they start forcibly conscripting young Lumbee men, dragging them out of their homes, and throwing them into brutal, disease-ridden labor camps. It is basically a death sentence via yellow fever and exhaustion. The Lumbee men, quite reasonably, decide they do not want to die for a racist government that treats them like dirt. So they run. They hide in the deep, impenetrable swamps of Robeson County. Henry and his family are among them, but hiding in a swamp means you cannot farm, and if you cannot farm, you starve. So Henry, now a young man, starts sneaking out of the swamp at night to steal food from the incredibly wealthy, slave-owning plantation owners. The rich elites of the county are furious. How dare these swamp people steal their artisanal hams? In 1864, the tension breaks. A wealthy Confederate postmaster named James P. Barnes accuses the Lowry family of stealing 2 of his precious pigs. Barnes knows the corrupt legal system will automatically hang the Lowrys based solely on his word. Henry's father, Alan Lowry, begs Barnes to drop it. Barnes laughs in his face and says he is going to the authorities. Henry, listening from the shadows, watches his father completely break down in defeat. Henry is 19 years old now. He has realized that the system is rigged. There is no justice for his people, so he decides to create his own. On a cold December night, Henry grabs his rifle. He waits on a dark dirt road for Barnes to walk by. Barnes sees the kid, sees the gun, and throws his hands up. But Henry has already done the math. This man threatened his family, therefore, this man has to expire. Henry raises the rifle and shoots Barnes square in the chest. Boom! Problem solved, right? Wrong. This is a small southern town. You don't just shoot a prominent white man and walk away. The local elites absolutely lose their minds. They call in the Home Guard. The Home Guard was supposed to be a local militia, but by 1864, it was basically a heavily armed frat house for rich cowards who had bribed their way out of serving in the actual war. They were thugs. The leader of the Home Guard, a psychopath named James Brantley Harris, decides to teach the Lumbee a lesson. He starts assaulting the women. When Henry's cousins tell him to stop, Harris beats them to death and claims self-defense. The courts do absolutely nothing. Henry cannot take it anymore. He stalks Harris, catches him riding in a buggy, and shoots him dead. The score is settled, but the Home Guard wants blood. While Henry is hiding, they raid his father's farm. They drag his elderly father and his older brother out into the yard. They don't even bother taking them to a courthouse. They hold a kangaroo court right there in the dirt, declare them guilty of stealing, tie them to a post, and execute them via firing squad. And the worst part, Henry is hiding in the bushes just a few yards away, watching the whole thing happen, completely powerless to stop it. The Home Guard rides away, laughing. Henry walks out of the bushes, falls to his knees next to the bleeding corpses of his father and brother, and makes a vow. He is going to burn their world to the ground. Henry goes full Rambo. He rallies his friends, forms the Lowry Gang, and immediately breaks into the local Confederate armory, stealing a massive stockpile of military-grade weapons. He transforms from a petty thief into the Robin Hood of the swamps. The gang relentlessly raids the wealthy plantations, stealing everything not bolted down, and redistributing the food to the starving poor people of the county, both native and white. The poor worship him. The rich are terrified of him. In 1865, the Civil War ends. The South loses. Henry thinks, great new management, I can retire. He actually disbands the gang and gets married. But the local plantation owners, who are still salty about their stolen hams and murdered friends, have the sheriff arrest Henry at his own wedding. They throw him in a heavily fortified jail cell, but they underestimate Henry's new wife. She bakes him a cake, and inside that cake, a metal file. It is the most Klitsch cartoon escape plan in history, and it works flawlessly. Henry files through the bars, walks right out the front door, and disappears back into the swamp. He realizes peace was never an option. The Lowry gang is reformed, and they are done playing nice. In 1869, they upgrade from robbery to straight-up assassinations. They ride up to the local sheriff's house, knock on the door, and execute him in cold blood. They compile a hit list of the most racist, corrupt officials in the county, and they start crossing names off. When the police arrest a few gang members, Henry personally ambushes the police escort and shoots the officers. The government panics. They put a $2,000 bounty on Henry's head. Wanted, dead or alive, nobody in the county talks. The poor people love him too much. The government raises the bounty to $12,000, which is roughly $300,000 today. Still, absolute silence. The Lowry gang are like ghosts. They strike and they vanish. Desperate, the new head of the militia, Francis Wishart, breaks the unwritten rules of war. He orders the arrest of the wives of the Lowry gang members, holding them hostage to draw Henry out. It is a bold strategy. Let's see how it plays out for him. On July 14, 1871, Henry and his heavily armed lieutenants casually walk out of the swamp and stroll right up to the front door of the most powerful plantation owner in the county. They knock. They politely ask the terrified family to serve them breakfast. The family, shaking, cooks them eggs and bacon. After finishing his coffee, Henry asks for a pen and paper. He writes a very polite, beautifully penned note, hands it to the weeping plantation owner, thanks them for the lovely meal, and walks back into the swamp. The family opens the note. It reads, "The bloodiest times will be here than ever was before, if our wives are not released in 3 days." The countdown begins. The entire county collectively wets its pants. They know Henry is not bluffing. On day 3, Henry shoots 2 random elite townsmen just to prove a point. The citizens of Robeson County are so terrified of this swamp ninja that a mob of regular people storms the militia camp, overpowers the guards, and releases the wives themselves. They literally do Henry's job for him because they are too scared of the consequences. Henry has beaten the system. He has humiliated the army, the police, and the rich elites. But he knows the pressure is mounting. Bounty hunters are circling. So, in February 1872, Henry calls the gang together for one final job, the ultimate heist. They break into the massive Pope and McLeod store in Lumberton, crack the safe, and steal $22,000 in cash. It is an astronomical sum of money, and then the most incredible thing happens. Henry Berry Lowry walks into the swamp with a giant bag of cash and vanishes completely. He doesn't die in a blaze of glory. He doesn't get captured. He just pulls off the ultimate magic trick. Poof, gone. Rumors exploded. Some said he accidentally shot himself while cleaning his gun. Some said he smuggled himself onto a train and lived out his days as a wealthy man in the Wild West. The government spent years searching the swamps, finding absolutely nothing. His wife never remarried, and she never said a single word about where he went. And most importantly, nobody ever claimed that massive $12,000 bounty. Henry Berry Lowry took on the entire Confederate establishment, outgunned the local government, secured the bag, and permanently ghosted the history books. The ultimate, undisputable historical MIC drop.